Hi, this is Kirk, the bariatric carnivore. Let's talk a little bit about vegetable oils and why I'm against them. Basically, there's just several arguments that I think all come together. I can't point to a study that says these vegetable oils are going to kill you, but I think I can make a pretty good case why I think they're unhealthy. So let's talk about it a little bit. Vegetable oils are polyunsaturated fatty acids. They were originally created as lubrication for industrial machinery back in England. It was basically a byproduct. Somebody figured out how to crush cottonseed oils, process them, create an oil, that lubricant, and that was okay for a while, but they went out of business. So Procter & Gamble bought that particular plant, that technology, brought it to the United States. Really, they were hoping to make soap with it. But one of the chemists noticed that there's a block of it that looked a lot like lard, and he wondered if they could resell it as a cooking oil. And about 1911, they introduced Crisco to start utilizing, and they called it a modern shortening, basically a way of lubricating pans and stuff so things wouldn't stick, and that was, they considered a modern way of cooking it. But at the time, there was no testing of it. Nobody really did long-term testing for safety or efficacy. There's been really no in-depth study as to how safe it is for human health. So it got into our food supply. Now, there were several things that got into our food supply at the turn of the 1900s. Basically, we started to see a new glut of sugar and processed wheat, flour, and between all three of them, they all came together at the same time. So it's difficult to say what was the thing that caused all the problems later on down the road, but this is when they all started getting into the food supply. And about 40 years later, we started to see a massive increase in the number of heart attacks. So they all kind of came together. And then in the 1950s, our president at the time, Eisenhower, had a heart attack, and this is in the middle of the Cold War, and there was a lot of panic, and people were wondering, my gosh, if the president can have a heart attack, how is that going to affect us? And people were very nervous and concerned about heart attacks. And there's this guy by the name of Ansel Keys, who you may, if you've never heard of Ansel Keys, he was not a doctor, he was not an MD, he was an animal physiologist out of the University of Minnesota. He was the guy who came up with the K rations during World War II and did a very in-depth and very interesting study on starvation using conscientious objectors during World War II. But he started looking at what was the thing that was causing the blockage in the arteries that was causing the heart attacks, and he discovered cholesterol. So he created a hypothesis. He said, if we could lower the amount of cholesterol in the bloodstream, that would end heart attacks. That was the lipid blood hypothesis. And it was never proven, but he created a survey where he looked at several different countries and noticed that places that had more saturated fat in the diet, boy, they had more heart attacks. Unfortunately, if he'd looked at all 22 countries, they would have realized, no, that wasn't quite the case. There were a lot of countries that ate a lot of saturated fat that didn't have heart attacks, notably Germany, Switzerland, and France. Those otherwise became known as the French paradox, where they ate all this fat but didn't seem to suffer from heart attacks. But nobody noticed that back in the 1950s and 60s. They all wanted to cure heart attacks. And the way Ansel was the guy with the answer, and his suggestion was lower your overall cholesterol level, and along comes vegetable oils. Because when you substitute animal fat for vegetable oils, industrial seed oils, you do lower blood cholesterol, and that helped increase sales dramatically. That's when margarine became popular. People started reducing the amount of fat that they use, like tallow and lard, and started replacing it with vegetable oil and Crisco and stuff like that. So there was a big change. The amount of vegetable oil that the average American ate went up over sixfold, pretty dramatically. Now, several things happened though during those years. There was a very in-depth study, and this is number one reason why I'm opposed to vegetable oil, and that was the Minnesota Heart Study. And what the Minnesota Heart Study did was they changed the diet in several mental institutions and a nursing home, and they gave half the participants margarine, vegetable oil, low-fat milk, and the other half got a standard American diet at the time, which was pretty high saturated fat. And they compared the two groups, and they did a lot of meticulous measurements, and they found out that indeed, when you give them all the vegetable oil and the margarine and stuff like that, you did reduce people's cholesterol scores. It went down. It went down pretty significantly. There was one downside. They died. They died at a rate 21% higher than the other group. And there was no difference appreciably in heart attacks, which surprised them, and they never bothered publishing the results. They published a partial survey a few years later in an obscure overseas journal, but it wasn't until really about 10 years ago when all the data was recovered and published in the New England Journal of Medicine, where it showed just how dangerous these vegetable oils were for long-term mortality. They tended to kill people. So that's one reason why I'm really against them. I think it's the best evidence I've seen that shows that there could be a very real danger to our own life if we have large quantities of vegetable oil, particularly when it substitutes for saturated fat. So the other reason why I'm against these things is the principal ingredient of a vegetable oil or an industrial seed oil, whatever term you want to use, is linoleic acid. And linoleic acid has a tendency to get into our own fat cells, making them kind of difficult to utilize the energy stored within them. There are some people that hypothesize that vegetable oils, long-term use, particularly in high quantities, gets into those cells and makes it difficult to utilize that fat as energy. And as a result, we have a tendency to keep hold of stubborn fat. And what I noticed is there's this great increase in the amount of carbohydrates that people eat and a tremendous increase in the amount of linoleic acid people are getting, both happening at the same time. So it's very difficult to tease out which one is responsible for our epidemic of obesity and diabetes, but they're both there. So I think there's reasons to get rid of both of them. And they seem to be highly inflammatory, which means that it makes it more difficult for your body to heal. And long-term inflammation is really what causes coronary heart disease more than anything else, because when the arteries start getting inflamed, cracks start to develop along the artery walls. The artery walls are repaired utilizing a bunch of goop that the body produces that includes cholesterol, and it forms almost like a pimple on it. And once it heals, once it calcifies, it's not that particularly dangerous. But when a hot zit, for lack of a better term, breaks and ruptures and gets into the bloodstream, it forms a clot. And that clot, if it gets into your heart, it creates a heart attack. And if it goes to the brain, it creates a stroke. So it's a highly dangerous thing that I really want to avoid. So I try to avoid linoleic acid for that very reason. So that keeps me away from things like cottonseed oil, vegetable oils, corn seed oil, soybean oil, all those type of oils. Now don't confuse industrial seed oils, the grapeseed oils and stuff like that, with naturally occurring oils such as olive oil or avocado oil or even coconut oil. Those are they're created by cold pressing. They don't have to go through an industrialization process. You just squeeze the fruit and out comes the oil. The problem is that too many of those have been adulterated with low-cost vegetable oils. That stuff, because of the subsidies that occur, is very cheap. It's ubiquitous. It is in almost all processed foods. It's difficult, when you go and you get a can of tuna or sardines or anything else, if it's packed in oil, odds are it's a vegetable oil or industrial seed oil, and that's difficult to get rid of. Almost all processed foods that you get, including breads, etc., are all going to have vegetable oils in them. Fake cheeses, the American slices, etc. Again, all vegetable oil. So you have to really look at the labels to determine whether you're getting, when you buy stuff, are you getting vegetable oils in there? And you can quit cooking with it, but if you eat processed foods, odds are you're getting a lot of vegetable oil. It's in all baked goods and cookies because it improves shelf life. So it's tough to get rid of it. So my answer to that is I just quit buying multiple ingredient items at the store. I pretty much buy anything that's got 3 items or less, and none of them are going to be vegetable oils. I just don't want them in my diet. But it's even tough when you go to a restaurant and I just order a steak for dinner because too many restaurants sprinkle vegetable oil on the outside to keep it from sticking to the grill. I mean, I have to really plead with the waitress, please tell the chef I'm allergic to vegetable oils, do not put them on there. And I am rather allergic to it, as I've gotten to the point now that I've had so few of them in the last few years that when I'm out on the road and I'm traveling for several days and they don't listen to me, if I have more than 3 meals with it, I'll start to throw up afterwards. They really bother me that much. So I am allergic to it, but I think it's, you're probably allergic to it for your health if you really get down to it. So take a look at it. If you start looking at the evidence, I think you can certainly have reason to pause and why you probably don't want industrial seed oils in your diet. If you like this message, if you want to hear more like it, please hit the like and subscribe button. It helps tell the algorithm that people are watching this and that it's important information. And you're helping other people get the word out. If you have a particular sensitivity to vegetable oils, industrial seed oils, put it down in the comment. I'd be curious to see what other people's reaction are to industrial seed oils. They're one of the 3 things that I think are really making America fatter. And I can't say with absolute certainty that they're a killer, but boy, when they seem to be in as many quantities, when we're getting 6 times more vegetable oil than any other generation in the history of the planet. This is something that's been introduced to our diet really within the last 100 years, and our health has only been getting worse. So it is worth looking at, and hopefully worth getting out of your diet. This is Kirk, the Bariatric Carnivore. I'll be back tomorrow with more messages.